Hi, I'm Carol,
Hi, I'm Lisa,
and
and we're
we're
the
the
Grief
Grief
Gurus.
Gurus. And today we're going to be talking about grief bursts. And you may be thinking, what the heck is a grief burst? And a grief burst is when a wave of grief just washes over you. And it usually happens at the most unexpected time, the most inconvenient time. And they can occur for different reasons, really. It can be sometimes something can activate you. It might be a song that you hear, it might be a smell of a perfume, might be a place, and all of a sudden, just grief comes over you. And what I would say is in the beginning, they're very frequent. I don't know if you found that, Lisa, but very often it didn't take very much. I can remember driving to work one day and all of a sudden just floods of tears and having to pull over and just wait it out. And it can feel a little alarming if you're not sure what's happening. But I just want to reassure you, it's normal, of course, and it's just this wave of grief. And we were talking the other day, weren't we, about grief bursts, and we both had separate incidences of them at the weekend. Lisa, do you want to tell us what happened with you?
It's so surprising. My daughter died in 1997, and my son died at birth in 2002. But that's quite a long time ago. But still, these things come up. And very recently, we were hanging out with some friends last weekend, and just kind of it felt, and maybe this resonates with you, but it feels like it's coming from nowhere. That I was overcome with emotion. I started to tear up. We weren't even talking about anything specific. It was just my husband and me and another couple, and the tears started to flow. And it used to be that when that would happen, I would quickly take cover. I would run to the ladies' room. I would suddenly have to take a phone call that didn't exist, or I would use any opportunity to get away. Since was with people that know me well and people that I know love me, I was able to just kind of sit there and, like, I don't know what's going on with me right now, but I'm just feeling very emotional, and I got through it. But as I went back, and this is a really important thing with grief bursts, I think, and really important to our healing, is to go back and do an inventory around what was going on at that time. What were the things leading up? Because even now, all these years later, what I realize is earlier that week, we had spent a lot of time working on our trust and will, and really granular decisions that needed to be made. And as you know, Carol, and our viewers may know, that I also have a very specially abled, as my son calls, or my husband calls him, son, Zachary, who's 26, but he's extremely complex medically. And in our conversations about wills and estates and trusts, we had to make some pretty difficult decisions. And I think in that space, leading up to the dinner that we were having last weekend, I was really imagining, because we were making different difficult decisions, who would care for Zach if his father and I both died at the same time? And what would it be like for Zach if even one of us died? And then, oh my gosh, is he going to die before us? Which I usually tell myself might be the preferable thing if I had to choose between me living in the world without him or the other way around. That's a very generous
Mm.
thought, and not one that I think will help me, God forbid, if I ever do have to live without him. But all of those different, these are all sort of subconscious thoughts that are going on while I'm making decisions and we're having conversations with the attorney and whatnot. So leading into this conversation with our friends, I could see that it wasn't so much where I was at the moment, but it was probably more just me settling into being in the company of people that I feel really loved by and comfortable with, that what I'd felt earlier in the week kind of came up. So,
Yeah.
what I would say about the grief burst is, if and when this happens to you, that if you're not in a place where you can sort of do a post-mortem, for lack of a better term, and try to figure out what happened, definitely try to take some time later, even if it's a few days later. Talk about it with someone that you feel comfortable with, journal about it, or even just sit and, meditate. Give yourself 10 minutes to just sit with that feeling and think, where did this come from? Because when we do that, and when we can really identify it or feel like we get a better sense of it, we feel less victimized. And
Mm,
I used to think of, I know that we call this grief burst, but the way I used to describe it in my own mind or to others was like the grief gremlins. It's like
mm,
they're waiting for you, rah, they come and get you when you least expect it. And we don't want to feel more victimized. We've already lost somebody so profound and so important to us. We don't need another opportunity to feel like we don't have control over what's happening with us. So
that's a
I
good
highly
point.
recommend, if you have the courage and feel like you can do it, take some time to say, I wonder what was really going on with me there. And don't feel victimized. This is a very natural thing that happens. And I'm wondering, Carol, if when you and I were talking earlier in the week and we both realized that we'd had this happen, what was going on for you? Or is
Yeah.
there a grief burst that you could tell us about?
Yeah, we're very comfortable talking about grief. We talk about it every day, all day.
Yes.
We read about it. And, my husband died 8 years ago. It doesn't mean I don't miss him, but I'm pretty comfortable in my grief, except occasionally. And I was doing a podcast with three other ladies who were grievers and coaches and the host. And we
Mm.
talked for an hour in depth about grief. And I got downstairs, and it's always a little bit tiring when you do an hour of talking about grief. I got downstairs and I just started crying.
Mm.
And oh, okay. I think it would, I don't know why. Particularly, of course, we were talking about grief. I was talking about Brian. And some days you just miss your person.
Mm.
Just some days,
Amen to that.
right? And even though we're many years out and some of you might not be, it still happens. It still happens. And I love that you sort of said, try and think about things leading up. What could possibly do it? For me, often it's music. Hearing his
Mm.
music it can still be challenging depending on whether I'm overly tired. Sometimes if you're just really tired and you
Gosh,
have
it's such a good point.
no bandwidth left, and of course in grief, the fatigue, the lethargy of grief means that you can't really cope with as much. And so it may take very little to cause those tears to flow. And I know when we've done Christmas talks about grief, one of the things I talked about, and it can be really related at any time, is tell people about a grief burst, because unless you're a griever, you don't really know about them. So if you've been invited out for drinks or dinner, why don't you give the hostess a little heads up and say, listen, sometimes this happens. Sometimes it might seem for no reason. I get a bit teary and I'll be okay. And if you're lucky and you're like Lisa was with her friends and you feel safe and comfortable, you can sit at the table and let the tears flow. Or maybe you just excuse yourself, go to the washroom. I think we've both done that. Or into another room just for a moment, let it pass and come back again, because it's hard for other people to see this. They don't know what's going on. They don't know if they need to cheer you up. They don't know what to do. So if they've had a little bit of a heads up to say, sometimes these things called grief bursts happen and, they're very frustrating, happens at the, most inopportune moment, and I'll be okay. I'll be okay. I can remember one of my clients saying she was just driving to the shops and one of the neighbors' husbands was in the garden and he waved at her and
Mm.
she burst into tears. She just burst into tears. She said, I don't know why that happened. So it can be things that you cannot even imagine will trigger these grief bursts, and they're totally normal. So
Mhm.
I hope this helps you really when you're thinking about your grief journey, that they'll happen a lot early on and then
Mhm.
gradually they'll tail off. And then 20 years later or 8 years later, up they can pop again. They're just there.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
just a last thought about it is, not I as you said, I was in a situation where I was in a great company for that to have happened. But if we're not in great company and we haven't had a chance to let someone know, for example, let's say we're at a business dinner and there are 20 people at the table and someone's talking about, oh, my pet died. And you're kind of thinking, well, really? Because my daughter died. This actually happened to me. And I'm sharing that because there are situations where it's not ideal for us to
Hmm.
sit and let our tears flow.
Yeah.
So we have to sometimes, going into situations, especially if we can't necessarily have that disclaimer because we're going to someone's home that knows us well or something like that. Maybe we're at the theater, or we're out, at a volunteer thing or someplace where we don't really have that control. I would say we have to be really mindful, excuse me, about who and which situations are capable of holding our grief.
Yes.
Because one thing that can make a grief burst more exaggerated and more painful is if we allow ourselves to be more vulnerable, and maybe we say, "Oh, I'm sorry this is happening, but my daughter died and it's still really hard for me." And then you see the vacant stares on the other side of the table and you wish you hadn't said it, because now you've got the grief burst going on and you've got the what I call spotlighting going on, where you feel like, if anyone's ever shined a flashlight right in your face and there's nothing else you can see and you just feel you're like on blast, you can't get away. So we don't
Yeah.
want to make it harder for ourselves. But again, if that happens, do what you can to keep composure. If you need to get go to the ladies room, or you need to take some breaths, whatever you may need to do, but you may not choose to share what's actually happening with you and you switch gears. But I do encourage you and invite you to come back to it later, because it is there to kind of teach you something. And if you can muster up the courage to be curious about it, you'll find that it takes you off guard a little bit less, so things aren't harder than
Yeah.
they already are.
I,
So,
I think you made a really, really good point. We have to choose who we share what with,
yeah.
right? Because we know that most people can't handle that. If you say, yeah, my daughter just died, people are like, oh God, what do I say? What do you say? What can you say? And so I think we have to be careful with what we share and with whom. As you say, it can just cause you to be in the spotlight and feel even worse, because you're like, oh no, now they don't know what to say and I feel bad and I shouldn't have said it,
Yeah.
and you're already in that.
Awkward.
So you feel
Yeah.
awful, you feel more awful than you already do. So yeah, choose who you share with, and look after yourself. I think taking yourself away from a situation is totally acceptable. Going to the ladies room or taking that fake phone
God
call with
love the
your
ladies
daughter.
room.
I know. I know.
It's a great
Yeah,
spot. So,
it is.
well, thanks for being here and joining us. And, if you found that this has been helpful or it's resonating, please go ahead and like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and check us out at thegriefgurus.com.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you.